Hey guys, we have finally gotten to the best part of all of cellular respiration, where all of the energy is actually being created. Those 32 to 34 ATP at the electron transport system. And if you remember, the electron transport system of the mitochondria is located on that convoluted membrane called the cristae. So let's get in. All right, so we know as electrons pass down the electron transport system on the cristae, energy is captured and ATP is produced. I have a separate video showing you exactly what's going on at the cristae, but we're going to go through these PowerPoints and hopefully you will go find the video on chemiosmosis and it will explain and show the drawings of this in detail. But anyway, okay, so we said as these electrons pass down the electron transport system, they are going to be losing energy because they are going to be used to help pump these hydrogen ions into the intermembrane space. We already stated that the ETS all by itself, all alone, can produce 32 to 34 molecules of ATP. And as these enzymes that are embedded within this membrane, the convoluted membrane that we call the cristae, it says that they will pump hydrogen ions into the intermembrane space. And if you don't remember what the intermembrane space is, it was the membrane that was inside the convoluted membrane, and the space was the space between the outermost membrane and that convoluted membrane. That is what we call the intermembrane space. And it says when we pump these hydrogen ions over into that intermembrane space, we end up building what's called an electrochemical gradient. Okay, a gradient meaning a change across the membrane, because we're going to have more of those hydrogen ions in the intermembrane space than we have in the matrix. So the cristae also contain a complex that's known as the ATP synthase complex. His name tells you exactly what he does. He synthesizes who? ATP. Okay, so you'll be able to take that ADP plus P and create ATP. So let's get into a little bit of this. And like I said, you want to check out that other video. But it says hydrogen ions are pumped across the membrane by carriers, which help to establish this electrochemical gradient. And then it says, once we have a gradient established across that membrane, it says the ATP synthase complex will give us an opportunity to allow those hydrogen ions to flow back across or through that ATP synthase complex, and that kinetic flow that's created from them flowing from that area of high concentration, which is in the intermembrane space, back to the matrix, is going to give us energy to take and synthesize ADP plus P to make ATP. So, and remember, it's always flowing from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. Now, because we will have oxygen picking up the energy spent electrons that are going to be released from the electron transport system, we will have what's called, this time, instead of substrate level phosphorylation, but oxidative phosphorylation. And that refers to the production of ATP as a result of the energy that's being released, those energy spent electrons that are being released from the electron transport system. And as oxygen receives those energy spent electrons, that's where that water is going to come from in that formula. Remember, we said oxygen is flowing across this membrane, and it's at the ETS where oxygen pulls those energy spent electrons out of the ETS, and then it's able to join with those hydrogen ions that are joining coming back through from the intermembrane space. And we know that if we have a half O2 plus two hydrogens plus those electrons, we end up creating water. So it says then it joins with hydrogen ions and forms water. So that's our what's going on down at the ETS. So let's look at cellular respiration in a nutshell. It tells us up at the top that we started with glucose and we used 2 ATP in order to kick this process off. Remember, we gained some ATP once we oxidized P-gal, which was our intermediate. I'm going to stick P-gal in here. P-gal, which is phosphoglyceraldehyde. So that's our intermediate. Remember, there's 2 of those. And it says once we oxidize completely, we'll end up with 2 pyruvate. Remember, we're going to gain 4 ATP. So remember, we have a minus 2 ATP. We're going to have a plus 4 ATP here. And that's going to give us this net of 2 ATP. Okay, so look where we're located, in the cytoplasm. So glycolysis takes place in the cytoplasm. And then it says the product of this reaction, the 2 pyruvate, the transition reaction will take us into the mitochondrial matrix. So we know that it says we're in the mitochondria. So we're in the matrix here where these next reactions are taking place. I'm not doing such a good job of writing, but anyway. So we're in the matrix. All right, so it says the 2 pyruvate will go in. Remember that they will be oxidized and covalently bonded to an entity called coenzyme A. And it says oxidation will produce these 2 carbon dioxides, and we're going to also produce these 2 acetyl-CoA. And you can see that the acetyl group is covalently bonded. That's a covalent bond that we see right here, covalently bonded to the coenzyme A. One thing that I did skip, remember, we see that from glycolysis, we have these 2 NADHs that were created. So NAD plus goes in, 2 NADHs go out. Same thing with the transition reaction. 2 NADs go in, they pick up the hydrogen ions and electrons being lost, we produce 2 NADHs. And remember, we said this waste carbon dioxide here will travel to the lungs to be exhaled. The 2 acetyl-CoAs will move into the citric acid cycle. So with the citric acid cycle, remember we said that they would join with a 4-carbon molecule called oxaloacetate, because remember the acetyl-CoA is a 2-carbon molecule. And it's going to join with this 4-carbon molecule called oxaloacetate. And then that will be formed into the citric acid. Okay, so that's where that name's come from, the citric acid cycle. Remember, we said several oxidations, some isomerizations would occur. And by the end of these 2 spins of the cycle, we will release the 4 carbon dioxide. Okay. And then we will also generate 2 ATP. And then we said some electrons and hydrogen ions will be picked up by NADH as well as FAD, NAD plus, as well as FAD. And we form the 6 NADHs and the 2 FADH2s, okay? And we said all of these guys, the coenzymes carrying their fare, would move into the electron transport system, okay? And this is where we would need that oxygen, okay? Because we said that the oxygen's job is going to pick up the energy spin electrons and the hydrogen ions in order to create water. So we know that O2 is being reduced in order to form water on the opposite side of the reaction, okay? We know that glucose was oxidized and it made who? All these carbon dioxides that you see. So that gave us a total of 6 carbon dioxides from the complete breakdown. Okay, so it says for every NADH that goes into the electron transport system, we produce 3 ATP. For every FADH2 that goes in, we're going to produce 2 ATP. So hence where you get these numbers. And then it says down at the bottom, it says for all of the electron transport system, you get 32 to 34 ATP. For the citric acid cycle, we ended up with 2 ATP. And then from the glycolysis, there was another 2 ATP. That's a P. Oh, wow. P. And another 2 ATP. That's what gave us this total of 4 ATP. So the 4 ATP plus the 32 to 34 ATP gives us this whopping load down at the bottom, which is the 36 to 38 ATP produced. So finally, we want to just wrap things up. It says glycolysis followed by reduction of pyruvate by NADH can either get us to produce lactic acid or alcohol and carbon dioxide. So fermentation, meaning the anaerobic pathway, meaning without oxygen, okay? And it says this can always provide a rapid burst of ATP. So, for example, any energy that's needed probably in a red blood cell would be produced in this fashion because we don't want to use the oxygen that we're needing to take to all the cells. This is also common in muscle cells, especially if you're sprinting, for example. Instead of doing a long distance run, this would be the quickest way that you can get that quick burst of energy. I hope that this has been as good for you as it has been for me, but this was cellular respiration in a nutshell. If you've read the chapter, there's a ton of information in the chapter. You don't need to know all that. We're giving you just some introductory things that you need to know. I hope you have a great rest of your day.